Welcome from me, Nick Gowing, to Davos in Switzerland. The Maryam Foundation is staging this debate in parallel to the World Economic Forum's annual meeting. Why are we addressing this issue of investing in nature, addressing our planet's most pressing leadership challenge? Well, the main reason is a few weeks ago before this recording, there was a remarkable debate and meeting in Montreal in Canada, COP15, discussing biodiversity, which made remarkable progress on how to tackle nature, far more progress than anyone ever expected. And certainly in a meeting here, which I attended just before the recording, the kind of language which we heard was, this is a remarkable transformation. It's creating new pathways to follow, and there's enormous urgency to achieve it. The kind of language which, when there was a meeting here in May of 2022, really there was a kind of sense of, you're doing the right thing, but you aren't going to make much progress. So we are talking about a fast rising line of success, with enormous debates about what needs to be done and the speed at which it needs to be done, hopefully with nature positive and remarkable achievements by 2030. So what we want to do is try to bring together an understanding of how this can be achieved with financial assistance, what kind of financial assistance is needed, and so on. Well, joining me in the first half of two parts of this debate is, first of all, Rania Mashak, welcome, the Minister of International Cooperation for the Government of Egypt. Secondly, Sherry Rahman, who is Federal Minister for Climate Change for Pakistan. And thirdly, Ellen Jankowski, who's Chief Sustainability Officer for MasterCard. Welcome, Ellen. Now, what I'd like to do is hear from each of you, first of all, how much progress you think really has been made. We've also got contributions from the floor, but what do you think, Rania? Has something quite remarkable happened here?
Well, let me speak and go back before Montreal, which is COP27. And I think COP27...
Which was a month earlier.
Which a month earlier was in November.
This was in
Sharm el-Sheikh. And for us and for everyone who was following, there were very important breakthroughs that also push the agenda forward in the meeting that you mentioned in Montreal. And some of the more important issues were attending to adaptation in climate change more, adaptation, resilience, a trust fund for loss and damage. So these are certain items that were not necessarily on the agenda. They became on the agenda, they were debated, so this was extremely positive. And then the concept of going from pledges to implementation, the finance part. And in going from pledges to implementation, innovative financing tools came about, including debt swaps for nature. So there is trying to find ways to actually look at the SDGs of water, life below water, life above water. So going back to the biodiversity question and trying to think about tools that can support countries in making sure that the biodiversity agenda, which is a very important climate agenda, is always there, and there is financing to push that forward.
But do you wish you had in Sharm el-Sheikh the kind of remarkable progress that was achieved in Montreal, which was leapfrogging, really?
At Sharm el-Sheikh, there was a biodiversity day, and most of the negotiators that go to Montreal are already at the COP. So it's always, you have to see these as continuation. If there's not a high note in a certain conference, it's very difficult to gain momentum in the one that is just a month after, or actually a few weeks after. So actually there was a very positive sentiment coming out of Sharm, particularly addressing what emerging markets and developing economies wanted. And as I mentioned, loss and damage was a very big success from the COP at Sharm el-Sheikh, as well as adaptation, particularly that food security and water security affect many countries, particularly in the African continent, which again, Egypt being in Africa was a very important testament.
Sherry Rahman, you've been through awful floods in the middle of 2022. What is your reflection on kind of the scale of forward movement, the momentum, the acceleration, the multiplier? Are we overstating it?
I think the transformative impact you're talking about is something we all want to see, but I think that its pledges and stated ambitions rarely meet the hard reality of actual process and realization of those pledges. So first of all, there's no compliance structures, there's no, other than showing intolerance for non-compliant businesses and countries. So that takes us very far away from what we want to see. You call the COP15 CBD framework transformational, perhaps similar to what Paris was for climate change. But I think we are very far from 1.5 or even keeping it alive.
Well, I'm just quoting there Johan
Yeah.
Rockström, for example, from the Potsdam Institute, who's one of the leading scientists, saying this was a remarkable
You want to
transformation.
hear my view or you don't?
I'm just telling
Yeah.
you where the word came from.
Well, I contest it, and there you are. Because my experience of pledges and ambitions don't realize into hard reality, especially as far as financing tools are concerned. There's a whole forest, a cottage industry of people discussing finance, creating instruments, working hard for making blended finance, private finance, public sector finance, MDBs, all of these responsive to the accelerated needs of countries such as ours who are in clear geographies of vulnerability. Now, there's an arc of human tragedy from Somalia to Pakistan, and that's not being addressed by the climate finance architecture, shall we say. It's also not being addressed by the 20th century architecture of the IDBs. It was created for different challenges, and it met those challenges, perhaps, but it is outdated for 21st century crises. They're coming hard and fast. The programming, the design of instruments, the ability to access them, to create bankable projects, to access deep financing with investors, to even move the needle on building, accessing funds already pledged. Those are very hard to do. You do know about the infamous adaptation fund, right?
Sure.
I mean, how much of it has materialized?
Very little.
There you go. So while I would like science to take a front seat, because it is speaking based on the voices of rationality, of making rational choices, those are not the choices collectively the world has made so far.
Let me pick up, if I may, with Ellen Jankowski. Welcome. You're from MasterCard. You're Chief Sustainability Officer. Now, you've only just quite recently joined MasterCard. What does the Chief Sustainability Officer of MasterCard do? What is your concern?
Sure. So MasterCard has a payments network, right? That's who we are. What does that really mean? We have 90 million merchants in that network. We have over 20,000 banking partners and 3 billion cardholders. So when you think about the 8 billion people on Earth, and 3 billion of those have that MasterCard, they're making choices with that MasterCard, there's huge opportunity there to scale solutions and to affect how people consume. And so that's what I'm most excited about. That's why I decided to join MasterCard, was to take advantage of that payments network for sustainable transformation and sustainable consumption.
And in simple terms, what are you trying to engineer in MasterCard using that network?
So when you think about those audiences, the merchants, what information can we ask for from those merchants to help enable our cardholders to make more informed decisions? So, in a sense, we're an information company, right? The price of something travels across that network, and then there's a transaction that happens. So what happens if we bring more insights like the MasterCard Carbon Calculator, which exists today? That's a tool that we make available to our banking partners. So at the end of the month, if you're a cardholder, you can look at the total that you've spent that month in all of your financial transactions, and you also get a total of your carbon impact. And right now, that total of the carbon impact is only as good as the data that we have. Right now, it's at the sector level. We're moving to the merchant level. And the vision is to move to the product level so that we're helping to inform those cardholders, those consumers and customers to make better, more informed decisions.
So we've heard two politicians. You're from the corporate sector, a leading player in the corporate sector, the volume of transactions going around the world. When you look at this title of investing in nature, how does that relate to what you are doing and what you think is achievable and what you will be able to multiply and accelerate?
So I think it exists on several levels. So one is what we just talked about, of investing in nature, investing in the planet, investing in the future of the human society living on the planet, and bringing those insights and that data and the information to decisions. Another way that we also think about this is with the MasterCard Priceless Planet Coalition. This is based on a commitment that our company has made to restore 100 million trees by 2025. So we have a strong partnership with Conservation International and WRI, where we are activating projects all over the world to restore those 100 million trees. So a direct connection between actions that our company is taking and how we're affecting the restoration of nature.
All right, well, what I'd like to do is get some views from our small audience we've got here. Let me go to Africa, to People Planet Africa. Wanjoy, you've joined us from that organization about living around forests. You've run one of the biggest campaigns in Kenya in 2018. What's the point you'd like to make to the panel?
I wonder whether industry and government are speaking to each other. Because you say you want to restore 100 million trees by 2025. Kenya, for instance, wants to restore 15 billion trees in the next 5 years. Ambitious as it is, we can't achieve that goal if we're not collaborating with industry. The other role of industry, and I hope industry would realize this, when I ran the campaign in 2018, it was successful because I'm a member of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. And when I went to them and made the presentation of the destruction of forests in Kenya, they had the power to go to government and say, look, we are exposing our future to a lot of harm. And if we don't impose this ban now and start restoring our forests, then we're not making progress. So I wonder whether industry and government are speaking together. I think on government, the Global South, if we don't unite, I think we will keep talking and talking and talking.
Well, let me put that to the two politicians, two ministers. What was your experience, not least during the beginning of your presidency of the COP process in Egypt? Are you speaking as loudly and as positively as you should be with business?
A few things. For the united voice and the voice from the South, there have been, with the UNICA, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, a statement that laid out very clearly what is the voice that Africa wants, the asks of Africa from COP, and this was presented during the conference. So there was a lot of mobilization around trying to work out what does Africa mean, how can we, with all the debt burden, make sure that we have enough innovative tools to move from the debt structure into more investments. But that requires, and I like very much the minister saying the excuse is always countries are not ready with investable projects. But in order to create the investable projects, you need to go through a few requirements. What are these requirements? Technical assistance, grant components that can actually allow the workout of the investment layout of the project, and that can happen through more collaboration between government, private sector, and here at WEF, we just also launched, and this was also discussed during COP, philanthropy coming in, because this is patient capital, it's capital that can take more risk, and therefore you can create the catalyst to actually bring in the private sector. Your point on, are we talking to private sector? Absolutely.
But could you be talking more? And could you be progressing faster?
Let me say that, any discussion, including climate, is on a track which we can always do more, absolutely, and we need to do more. But I think the important outcome of Glasgow before COP27 was that the private sector came in the discussion, came in very forcefully, and what we wanted to do at COP27 is try and think about how can we go from the how, not why isn't the private sector there with the government, it's how can we move it further, and that's where we came out with a guidebook on just financing, trying to give a definition for just financing, try to make sure that you want us to do climate action. All of us want to achieve global climate goals, but we should not be doing that through accumulating more debt. This has to be created by more equity, by more blended finance, by the MDBs helping further to actually catalyze more private sector investment.
Jerry Rahman, what's your view about the relationship you have now with government, particularly after the major flooding catastrophe, where the impact of diversity problems, climate change, the climate emergency was made so clear, 33 million people at least affected, massive impact on the economy?
Well, I mean, my relationship with government is that I'm in it.
With corporates.
But you said government.
I meant
You meant
corporates.
corporate. Well, yeah, so I think it needs to be far more enhanced than it is now. We are working in Pakistan with the private sector towards Pakistan Net Zero projects, mostly the big textile manufacturers, those are our exports. But I think we need to do a lot more. There is an element of denialism still amongst corporate leaders, amongst even country networks, and that's something that shows our collective failure. It's not you, it's not me, it's all of us. We have not been able to take the public conversations to the level it's needed. So every little island of rationality works, right? But every little meeting, big, small, COP27, highest level, or today, should be a call to action. And why I say this is because when we see the 33 million impacted, it's a postcard from nature right to our doorstep. And I'm saying that all ecosystems are connected, all climate is connected. So what goes on in Pakistan will not stay in Pakistan if that is needed to motivate people.
But let's be clear, are you talking about denial or rejection or a lack of understanding?
I think a little bit of all three. We can't sort of put all those in silos. There is a little bit of putting off difficult decisions to the future. And if businesses such as your card, is accelerating forestry and trying to work with CSR in climate, then it needs, I would think that you would need critical massing by speaking to other vendors. I know you compete, but our models of business and government need to change. They need to change for that critical mass that is needed to shift the needle on biodiversity loss or even climate action, because climate change, because we are way off the mark on all of those.
Well, let's check with Ellen. Do you think you're involved in shifting and moving the needle in a different direction and acting as a multiplier?
So let me address that from 2 points. One is to address the reforestation issues. We actually have one of the Priceless Planet Coalition efforts that's happening in Kenya. The reason we chose Kenya was based on Johan Rockström's science. He is the strategic advisor, the head scientist of Conservation International, our key partner in the implementation of the Priceless Planet Coalition. So there is no way that MasterCard would know what to do, where to go, where to plant, how to do it, how to work with the local community to make sure it's actually accepted and that the goals that we've set are really, truly happening, not planted, walk away, the tree, doesn't thrive. So what we need is to have the best science, the best partners, the best information we can have here. So that's why I'm here in Davos, right? This is one of the key reasons, is to continue to listen and learn and find partners who are elevating the action that we can work with to multiply.
But how does that work as an accelerator? What do you think? How do you think it will work? Not in 10 years, but in 10 months.
Yeah, and I go back to the sustainable consumption and leveraging that value chain, that powerful, scaled value chain that we have. And again, that's the center of all of my conversations here this week. It's around how do we accelerate this, leveraging that value chain. I'm offering it up. MasterCard is offering it up for the best idea, the best scientists to run additional carbon information, again, like we've started to provide with the carbon calculator. Let's up the game and let's scale this action.
All right, let's get another question from Dominic Souris. Welcome, Dominic. You are a founder and former executive director of the Youth Climate Lab. Right, from Canada. Right.
Yes.
What's the point you'd like to make about what needs to be done?
Well, I'd like to talk about, COP27 and 2022 and how I think one of the big, we talked about this loss and damage fund. COP27 was my 8th COP. I'm a bit of a COP nerd, and I think that was the first COP that I didn't leave. Yeah, didn't leave totally depressed, and I think it's because we had the Loss and Damage Fund, but also, but also it felt like climate justice and just transition were louder than ever. And thanks to your leadership, but also the leadership of young people, of indigenous peoples, of communities most affected. So my question is, how do we keep the momentum on climate justice to center climate ambition in climate justice? And specifically, what is the role of the private sector in advancing action that is rooted in justice?
You have that job at COP27 for this current year,
Yeah.
maintaining momentum. How are
Absolutely.
you doing it?
So we are doing this in several ways. First, from one COP to the next, there's always dealing with the next presidency. We were cooperating with the UK presidency. Now we're cooperating with the UAE presidency, so that the topics between now and next November are shaped up so that at COP28, these issues do not die, but actually are elevated. I think bringing in the word just, whether it's in the just transition and the just financing, is extremely important. People can sit down and debate, what do we mean? What is the definition of just? What is equitable? We were able to come up with a just financing definition, and this was done collectively in collaboration with stakeholders, MDBs, private sector, government, as well as philanthropy and think tanks. So we're very proud that we were able to come up with a definition to make sure that there is a way to look at the historical responsibility, but at the same time have equitable access to quality and quantity of finance. It's not just the quantity of finance, but the quality of it, so that there's a continuation. The other thing which is quite important when it comes to the just issue is when you see countries, you should not think about climate and development separately. They are not mutually exclusive, and this is a trap. Because you know, you mentioned about advocacy, the public opinion, and so forth. Climate should not be seen as a burden. It should be seen as integrated within the development strategies of countries. And if we are able to crack that and continue pushing it forward, be it with the public-private partnerships, with private companies that want to come in and invest, what you will be able to do is that each and every development project has climate goals, and therefore we're able to achieve national as well as global goals together. So I think these were extremely important at COP27. We're continuing this during this year, as well as how are we going to finance loss and damage. The 100 billion, which was pledged before, today, the needs to move the climate ambition are even bigger than any gap that we've spoken about. We're hit by the pandemic, by the crises, so the gap keeps on growing.
But let me therefore put to you, some of the figures being thrown around are mind-blowing.
Yes.
And certainly 700 billion is talked about on nature alone, quite apart from the trillions that are being talked about in other areas too. Yet, the United States, the IRA, could raise 360 billion at the sweep of the president's pen. Do you believe the money is raisable and can be generated in the next few months, couple of years, at a speed that matches the urgency of the climate problem?
The more all of us talk about it, the more the problems. What happened in Pakistan is very real. It affects lives. There's the definition of loss and damage is not just about the financing, because there's a human element, you know, there's a people aspect. It's not just about how much land did I lose. It's like how much livelihood was affected. So there's you mentioned, are we speaking, is this enough? No, this is a continuing.
But is it deliverable?
It's deliverable if we can move forward. And how do we move forward? We need to think about ways to increase capital in MDBs, and that's a discussion that's taking place currently. We also need to think about how to de-risk, because the situation, the macro situation today is very tricky for many countries. So how are you able to attract investments when we say we don't want to go into more debt?
Well, let's check that with Cherry. Which way do you think things are moving? Are they moving at the kind of pace that is needed, with the volume that's needed as well?
So I'd love to say that they are, because they should. It's not as if the money isn't in the system, which is why I said we need a redesign of the entire Bretton Woods financial architecture, and there is some appetite for that. I mean, Alok Sharma kept talking about that, the outgoing presidency for 26, and many contenders have now seen the mismatch between the finances available and the very accelerated need, right? So that's number one, but the issue really is making the connection getting the coalitions together, because we all talk and work in silos and we are all responsible for that. We speak of our own cases, whereas there is no, I mean, this is the 20th century mindset still. It is the boundaries we set on ourselves. And I think we need to move beyond that to surface with very high collective action targets and then actually pledge to meet them. But pledges carry on, and pledges are wonderful. Even the loss and damage fund, I think it was a great victory. It was a great triumph. It left us feeling, I mean, we left early morning or I don't know, many nights blurred into day, and Pakistan had the presidency of G77 plus China to lead that. And we used that very effectively or across the board. Egypt delivered the implementation COP that they promised, and I said that at the closing. Yes, yes. But you know, on balance, you can say that the mitigation targets were wobbly. I'm sure you'll say that, because they were. They were. And for people like, you know, living in Pakistan on the edge of the burn, because, you know, climate change loss, biodiversity loss, all of it is non-linear. It affects now what I call the arc of vulnerability, again, Africa to South Asia and some Asian nations. Excuse me, it's where you live on the longitude, right?
But this
and
is
that's affecting us harder and faster than, say, it'll ever come to Davos. It will come to Davos one day, but much beyond the catastrophe, much after 1/3 of the globe is living in the 19th century again. So we're living, we could be forced into medieval times. I don't mean just Pakistan, many countries, with the return of 19th century diseases, with the return of so much more that has bred from our lack of collective action. And here, I mean, I often find, I really appreciate these conversations, but I often find people think it's okay, and it's leading me to be anxious now about the state of public mindsets.
You're not alone in that.
Sorry?
You're not alone in that.
Yeah, because everyone is speaking about the actions they're taking, and I could sit here and tell you what Pakistan is doing, etc. That is not the point.
Well, can I
Yeah.
just pick up
Yeah.
with Ellen? Your business is money, circulating money, producing a dynamic, which is money being spent, money being collected. When you look at the money markets, it's not quite your area, but when you look at what money it can do and how money can contribute to some of what we've just heard from the two ministers, which is the urgency of people investing in saving nature, what do you believe is possible?
So I would say, of course, the tone is changing, right? This sense of urgency, if we even look at the WEF risk report this year, right? The climate is all over it. So I think the leading financial systems and the leaders of those organizations, you know, they are here, they are engaged on this topic. I do want to go back to a moment to the question on climate justice and the inclusivity of all of the solutions that we're developing. At MasterCard, we've been leading in financial inclusion for quite some time, for over a decade, and thinking about the social impact of that, right? Like, lots to talk about, lots of proof points. We've set a goal for 1 billion people to be financially included by 2025 and have made tremendous progress towards that. But what hasn't happened is connecting financial inclusion as a tool for climate adaptation and how that tool can help enable communities to be more resilient to what is already happening in terms of climate change becoming a reality.
Can I ask a question of you? Sure. Would you consider, as I said, building the critical mass on your actions, which are very important, right? Because what businesses can do, sometimes governments can't, and vice versa. So would you consider engaging other big card holders? I mean, obviously MasterCard is big, Amex is big. Would you consider sitting with them, pooling your knowledge, because databases are crucial, and you're saying that you're using yours. You don't have to share them, perhaps. I mean, obviously, those are things you can work out. But would you consider tooling, building a toolkit in this whole industry for accelerating that action? And looking at it, moving the needle in ways that will actually be seen on the ground. Now, we need 8 billion trees done, right? We're working on it. But that's just not going to be enough. Yeah.
And I would say, absolutely, we have to work within our own segment and our own sector. And I came from the technology sector, where we were also working with our fiercest competitors on how we were going to navigate these issues and bring urgency and solutions. So I think this is not a time, this is not an issue where you can be competitive about it. We have to figure out how each sector and each industry needs to work together to change. So absolutely open to it. And it is required, right, for this vision of sustainable consumption and to really leverage that payments network. We'll have to work within the industry.
Let's get one more question at the moment, or one point from. I'm going to go to Chitra Gamani, if I may, from Mauritius. You're a global shaper, but importantly, you are involved in social work, but also you have been involved in experiencing considerable economic loss in Mauritius. You've seen the price of biodiversity loss, and particularly because of the result of climate change impacts.
Definitely. I would like to share Madame's feeling when she said that she's anxious. I am even more anxious because I come from a small island, which is literally in a dot in the world map. And given the fact that around the world, there's so many things happening and we are not considering small developing island state. Where I come from, there are all the time floods happening, cyclones, and I wouldn't say that we are the one that's emitting the most carbon emission around the world, but we are the one that are facing the most impacts. So I want to ask you the question, like, I do understand that there are big platforms where decisions are being taken, but what about those small islands who are equally facing the damage when they haven't done anything about, like, wrong in this? And I'm deeply concerned about my people. And to be honest, I'm the only Mauritian amongst the 2,500 participants in the World Economic Forum. And this is for me stunning, and it is quite scary. I would admit. I'm not sure how much I could do as a young global shaper, but I'm just here because every day we are having so many forums, so many for the past years, saying that we are going to tackle climate change, we're going to bring changes, but I don't see how it's happening. Currently, my country is going through a cyclone, right? And there are so many things happening, and I'm just trying to see how we could find a solution to this.
You're frustrated and angry.
Frustrating, angry, and concerned.
And there's another part to this I should have said earlier, that you're what is called a people analyst at a bank. What does that mean?
Oh, a people analyst is me working on human capital data in the bank.
Okay, so
yes.
You know a lot about us.
Yes.
Okay, right. Yeah. Okay, pick up, Minister.
Vulnerable states and islands are on the top of the agenda in any COP. And in this particular COP, that was the basis of why to have a loss. I mean, you were the catalyst behind moving into a loss and damage, putting it on the agenda. It wasn't on any agenda before. And even though the modalities or the financing for the loss and damage trust are not worked out yet, but just having that idea there, because in the past it was always, and you mentioned mitigation was not, the outcome was not so much, but it's because the focus has been so much on mitigation, not on adaptation in the past. So now adaptation is on the agenda, and for the first time, loss and damage and trying to find financing. Now what's happening is that many of the countries and many of the MDBs are saying we're going to take from the allocations we already have to loss and damage. So this is something that we have to tackle, right? And this is where more of the actual loss and damage, not just on the infrastructure, but on the people aspect, needs to come to life so that we can push that agenda forward. But are we at the finish line? Absolutely not.
But what you're hearing there is, I put words in her mouth, but she agreed, frustration and anger. Sherry Rahman, what are you feeling about this as a minister when you hear this kind of thing coming from the next generation?
I feel terrible. Look at the Maldives. It's a slice of paradise, really. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful locations in the world. If you've been privileged to go there only once, the Maldives, and you know, the small islands have been doing this for 30 years. They've been fighting this fight for 30 long years. So really, honestly, too little, too late, and probably your minister the other day said to me that, and we collaborated very closely together. So the good thing was when we collaborate, we get stuff done. And we were on the phones, we were working through the night, it worked. So what you need is emissions lowered, don't you, drastically. And you also need serious adaptation action, because that was not really addressed a little bit. It was addressed a little bit at this COP, but I would like to see adaptation at front and center at 28, because I don't see the climate changing fast enough to save countries like the Maldives, which your minister said at 8 years? 8 years. It's sinking. So, sea levels are rising. I mean, our glaciers are melting at 300% the rate they used to. We have the largest amount of glaciers in the world outside the polar region. They're quite awesome. Everybody comes for trekking. But the glacial melt is accelerating so fast that we can't even measure it right now. And it led to, combined with a completely catastrophic, unpredictable, out of the blue monsoon that went on for 8 weeks, unrelenting. So it was like a biblical flood from the sky, also torrents from these mountains. And they were plucking out huge bridges, resilient structures built from our 2010 superfloods, like toothpicks. If I could show you the video, which we were showing at COP, you'd just be stunned. And but one of the ways forward is, and we worked with the UN very closely. One of the ways forward is that while working with the humanitarian crises, which you all have, which we're all having now, and even those funds are not enough to meet daily needs. You put together a reconstruction program. We put them together, and we pitched it at Geneva with those projects. But it's a very hard ask.
All right, we're going to be talking to economists in a moment, in the second part of this. But Ellen, as you sit here and you said you're learning, you're appreciating, you're charting the way forward. You're charting the way forward for MasterCard. What are your reflections of what you heard in the last 25 minutes, and what you're picking up about how a major, very successful corporation, international corporation that so many people rely upon to just do basic business, whether it be a few shekels, a few pennies, a few whatever, or massive amounts. What kind of conclusions are you taking away about investing in nature?
Well, so to your point, who's here? Who's here in Davos? What voices are at the table? So I think it's tremendous that you are here, right? There are more indigenous peoples here than ever before. There are more women than ever before. There are more chief sustainability officers that have been invited in. It is not enough, right? Look at the numbers. They're still not good, right? And I think that needs to be one of the clear voices that while we're all here, those messages are sent. So in terms of investing in nature,
and what MasterCard does next.
And what MasterCard does next. I think for us, again, it's how do we continue to scale the Priceless Planet Coalition? We're looking for additional partners. We have, I think, over 150 as of now. So the door is open. All are invited to become a part of that coalition of forest restoration. But even bigger than that, we are here, again, looking for solutions at the core of our business. Right? How do we transform our business and that value chain for sustainable consumption?
Very quickly, Sherry, you've got to...
I have an invitation to make for something going forward. 12:30 tomorrow at the Schatzalp. No, we're building one of the largest nature-based investments tomorrow, and I'm pitching that project. It's called the Living Indus Initiative. And this is one of the largest rivers in the world. This runs as a jugular through Pakistan. It is where the flooding also comes from. So we've created a program of 25 investment. It's an investment menu. Please come.
All right. Well, look, anyone in the room can come as well. So can I thank all three of you for the moment? We're splitting the debate. We've had the first half. Don't go away, but you are able to leave. Thank you very much. Stay with us, please. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you.